So, hey everybody, my name is Liz New, and I am the assistant manager at the Makerspace, and we are here at my ceramic studio, which you can kind of see behind me. Here we go, it says Clay Space. This is actually a temporary space. We're building a brand new space across the street from where we are now that is gonna be totally amazing. It's huge and beautiful and shiny. But this is to give you a good idea of what it is that we do here and what the process of ceramics is like. My background is actually in ceramic art. I got my undergraduate degree in ceramics from Alfred University before I got my master's in industrial design and came to work for NYU. So I have a long history and a really deep love for the material and all of its processes. I am going to turn the camera around and show you the inside of the space. So here we are. This is the door, the entrance to the space, and you can come in. We'll do a quick kind of overview and then take a look at each of the things in the space. So we have over in the far left-hand corner here is a kiln. There are just racks and racks of people's work, glazes. These are the wheels I'll be demoing on in a couple of minutes. In the back, we have like a little kitchen and a sink. This here is actually one of the private studio spaces. And we have a slab roller and then the wedging area here, which is where we prepare clay to get ready to throw. So I'm just going to take a quick walk around. There's lots of states to clay. It's one of the fun things about it. So there's like the squishy clay that everybody is familiar with. And then once it's gone into the kiln, you get this, which is bisqueware. So you can see it's signed and it's finished. This is not my work, but you can hear, hopefully, that that is hard and not squishy. That means it's gone in a kiln the first time and it's pre-glaze, which is how you get the color and the glass-like texture on the outside of a piece of ceramic. These have actually also have underglaze on them, which is a type of colored clay, and they're unfinished. And then on the bottom here, you can kind of see these glossy textured pieces are like the ceramics that you would find, say, at the store, but obviously much cooler because somebody has made them. This corner here is all of the things that go into the kiln so that you can stack your work and fire it. So kilns are basically like giant toasters. They are, in this case, this is an electric kiln and not a gas kiln. The inside of the kiln has elements in it. And you can see the elements look a lot like toaster elements, and they heat up. And they heat the inside of the kiln to a specific temperature. You can see here that they've started to load some work into the bottom of the kiln. And then each of these shells goes into the kiln, and it's made out of like a very high temperature clay so that when it heats up, the shelves will stay straight and not warp. This over here is work that's getting ready to go into the kiln. One of the interesting things is keeping track of the temperature inside of a kiln. So we have what's called cones, which are these, little cones of material that are made out of chemicals that melt at specific temperatures. And what you do is you put them inside the shelves, inside the kiln while you're firing on the shelves. And it tells you based on how far the cones have melted, whether or not your kiln got to the temperature that you wanted it to, no matter what the electronic display on the kiln tells you. So this way you can tell if there's a discrepancy between the temperature you think that you're getting and the temperature that the computer tells you that you're getting. So over here you can see, we'll get up some up close views of the work that people in the studio are working on. The breadth and quality of work in the studio to me is always incredible. They're just really amazing and talented people here. And at every single level, we have like beginners, we have people who make and sell their work. It's just really like an incredible, incredible thing. So this stuff is all stuff that's getting ready. It's been glazed and getting ready to go into the kiln. to get fired. This is some work by Monty, who makes a lot of planters in these like crazy shapes and sizes. I think his work is genius. You can see here, we have face pots and some flowers and baskets and sculptures, giant pots. And then I'm going to come over here. So some of the tools that we have are the slab roller. So this is one of my favorite things, just because it's a tool that makes your life like way, way easier. Clay comes, we don't make our own clay, so we buy clay in bags. It usually comes in 25-pound bags. And I have pre-cut a couple of things because I have to carry the camera around, and it's hard to cut stuff. So here we have a slab of clay. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the slab of clay and we are gonna put it in the slab roller and then squish the edges down, cover it with another piece of canvas, close the front of the roller, and then you can see there is a giant wheel. And I'll take questions at the end. It's hard for me to like hold the video and then answer questions, but I think that I saw something about ClaySpace. They are open. When the new space opens, they will be taking applications for new people, and there is a ton of space. So you should absolutely email them and contact them for studio space because it's amazing. So you can see as I turn the wheel, the giant tube moves down. I'm going to keep turning it until we get past the end of the clay. And then go back. Right, and then when you lift this up, you'll see we have a beautiful, even, flat piece. So that is for doing things like making tiles, or I actually, because this clay is so soft, you can see, I actually have a stamp that you can see. So here, this is just a number stamp, but you can see that this is a great way to like make a plaque or make the bottom of a cup, and you can cut sections of it out with a knife and use it to make the base of sculptures. There are all sorts of amazing things that you can do with a slab roller. So now I was going to talk a little bit about preparing clay to get ready to throw. So I'm going to set this down so that you can kind of see where I'm working. So one of the things that you have to do is to wedge your clay. You can kind of see there that there's like an older piece of clay on top of a newer piece of clay. And what you want to do is you want to get it so that it turns into like a really nice homogeneous texture. Sometimes the outside of the clay bag will be a little bit harder than the clay on the inside of the bag, and you want to kind of mix that all together. So it's hard enough that like, you know, it'll stay where you put it. So it's not like you can mix it like it's a, you know, a bread mixer. So what you do is you take the clay and you start to push it together and then turn it at the same time. So as you push and turn and push and turn, push, turn, you start to get what's called a wedge. So you can see there's a couple different ways to wedge clay. This is my favorite. I like the snail shell. You can also make kind of a duck face, but for me, this is the most successful shape. And you just keep on pushing the clay. And what this does is it pushes all of the air bubbles to the outside of the clay and then systematically moves the clay to the like interior. So you can kind of see how it starts to like roll in. So then that is mixing the clay the way that you would say use like a mixer if you were baking, but without having to use big old tools like that. So you do this until you get it to where you feel like it is a good shape and size. This is bigger than the demo that I'm going to do today, but you can kind of see in the back here, there are scales. And so then what I'll do is I will cut these sections apart. Actually, probably pull them apart. Let's see, and we will try to get some one. So you can see there, that's about a pound. So we're going to get some 1 pound balls. You can see here, this is what the clay looks like. I'm going to form that into a ball. So, and then this is what is going to go on the wheel as the start of my shape. So I think you saw over here, we have wheels over here. You can kind of see my iPhone is over there. I am going to turn the camera off over here, and I'm going to turn the camera back on over there so that you guys can start to see what it is that I'm doing close up as I start the demo. So give me just 1 second. All righty. Ooh, sorry. Okay, is that better? No more, okay, good. No more feedback. So here you can see, this is the top of the wheel, and there are little pins here. So the pins are to hold what is called a bat in place. So this is what I'm going to throw the cup on. And it's, what it does is it allows me to, although I'll probably cut this one off, if you're making something large and you don't want to touch it when you're finished, it allows you to take the whole bottom of the piece off the wheel, set it aside, and then get another bat and then start another piece without having to touch or mess with a finished object. The parts that I'm going to be making are so small that we're just going to cut them off and use the same bat over and over again.
Hey, Elizabeth, is it possible to rotate it? Because you're up and down right now, and I can't see. The iPhone is up and down instead of left to right.
Give me a second. Let me see if I can do that.
Sure. Brilliant.
Oop, hold on, I got to find something to hold it up. It's falling over.
Okay.
Give me 1 sec. Let me get some support.
Sure.
There we go. Can you see now? Is that better?
Yeah. If you just want to move it a little bit over to your right, there you go. Just like that.
Awesome. Sorry about that. I did not realize it was going to do that. All right. So these are splash pans. And the important thing about this is that it helps keep everything neat and tidy. All of the water and the excess clay and like all of the junk and everything from throwing gets caught up in these pans. And it means that I don't have to mop the floor every time I throw something. So it's very important to put these on before you get started, and especially in a shared studio. I know lots of people who actually prefer not to use these, but they all have their own space and do not have to share it with others. So what you do to get these on is slide this over 1/2. You'll see that there's this guy has a much bigger hole in the bottom than the other half. So that's the one that goes on first. And you slide it on. And then you take the second half, which you can see has a much smaller hole, And there's actually like this little lip here. So the lip fits over the lip on the other part. Snap those together. I like to turn them so that they won't come undone. So then the other things that I have here are just a bowl of water. Woo, this is just plain old water. I have a sponge. I have a wooden tool that's going to help me clean the bottom of the piece and get the piece off the wheel. I have a wire tool, which you can see is, literally a wire on two small pieces of wood. And this cuts through the clay and takes it off the wheel when we're finished. And then I have a needle tool, which is also exactly what it sounds like. It's like a pointy piece of metal on a holder that you can use to clean up the tops of your parts or to sign your piece when you're done. And then finally, I also have some trimming tools for making the bottoms of parts look nice. And I prepared a couple of cups last week. So I should be able to demo trimming for you unless they are too hard, which I'm hoping that they are not. So now we're going to go back to the bat and we're going to find the holes on the bottom. And we're going to line those holes up with the bolts on the top of the wheel, which sometimes takes a second. But you want to make sure that you do this right, because if they are not attached, then when you turn the wheel on, it will fly off, which is no fun. Sorry, this is taking a second. Sometimes it's hard to get the holes lined up. There we go. That's 1 and 2, and you can see it makes a little noise, but it's not going anywhere when I mush it around. All right, so then I have our balls of clay. I'm going to take the sponge. And one of the things I didn't show you, but I can show afterwards, is that there is a little foot pedal on the floor here, right to the right of the wheel. And what it does is it allows me to control the speed that the wheel is going. So as I move the sponge across, you can kind of see that it's moving. It's a little hard when there's no like color differentiation. I like to wet the wheel down a little bit before I get started. And then I'm going to take the ball of clay that you saw me roll up, and I'm just going to smoosh it onto the surface. So you can see it's not going anywhere. I can give it a good wiggle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to center it. So centering is exactly what it sounds like. The wheel is working in with centrifugal force. And so what you want to do is make sure that the clay is in the center of, if you think of it like a whirlpool, right? There's like the quiet in the center of a storm, or the space in the bottom of a whirlpool. And that is where you want to put your clay. It takes a little bit of upper body force. I find that it is very helpful to take your elbow and put your elbow into the crook of your leg right here. And what that does for me is it stabilizes my arm. And instead of like trying to use my whole upper body to push something into the right space, it just holds my hand exactly where I want it. And I can move the clay around, and I put forward a lot less effort to get something into the center. So the towel is to dry my hands and to keep clay off my pants. It is doing nothing fancy, but I am going to keep it on my leg here. All right, so I'm going to put a little bit of water. Wheel this until it gets a little bit closer to center. And then push with my palm, and then push down with the edge of my hand here. So we're pushing, this hand is pushing this way, and this hand is pushing down. And that is going to take this lump and make it into a shape. You might be able to hear that in the background. There is a metal door outside that goes up and down. There may be some visitors to the studio. People are coming into work. So we'll see if that happens. I'll have to put my mask back on, which is fine. It's in my pocket. But you can see I'm pushing the clay up and down and up and down. And what that is doing is, just in case I've missed any air bubbles, that's helping to work the air bubbles out of the clay. You can see there's like some what we call slip. Hey, we have a visitor. Hold on, I have to put my mask on so that I'm not putting anyone in danger. Just 1 second. Dry my hands off. No, it's fine.
I'm not that. I'm immune to it.
Nah, you got to do the right thing.
I know.
So, get it out of my pocket. Of course, my hands are wet. All right, so mask on. We're back to it. So you guys can see on the wheel here, I'm going to clean up some of the slip that you also saw on my hands. And then I'm going to get this into the shape that I'm looking for. One of the things to keep in mind when you're making a cup is whatever the width of the bottom of this clay is, that is going to be the largest the bottom of your cup can be. So if you want to make a cup that's like a super big soup bowl cup, then you have to start with the bottom of it extra wide. If you want to make something that's teeny tiny on the bottom, then you have to make the bottom really teeny tiny to start. It's very, very hard to change the bottom shape of whatever you're throwing. So there we go. And you can kind of see the clay looks a lot less wobbly now. It's not moving around. Let's see if we can pick up my phone and get this back. You can kind of see from the top that it's that little divot is in the center. And so again, that's what I was talking about earlier, is like that is what centering is for, right? It's like you want to get your clay directly into the center of this vortex that is the wheel. And we're going to mark the center really clearly. And then what we're going to do is put a little bit of water on the top. And then I like to use 2 fingers. Everybody has a different way of doing this. And you want to push into the bottom and not go all the way to the bottom, but get close to where you think that you want it to be. And then pull the clay out. You want to do it as evenly as possible so that you're not making new wobbles where you just got rid of the old ones. All right. So then once you do that, you want to take, the goal is to push at the same time from both the inside and the outside, and then pull up. So, and that is what makes the shape of in this case, the cup that I'm making. So I'm going to put my left hand on the inside. I'm going to take my right hand and put it on the outside. And I like to touch my hands together so that I feel like I know that they're traveling at the right rate, at the same rate. So, and then we're just going to pull up slowly. And you can kind of start to see that it's changing shape. And then you need to make sure that you're constantly adding water. The less water you have, the stickier your clay is going to be, and the harder it's going to be to move it around. And you just keep on adding water and moving the shape until you get the shape that you want. In this case, this is going to be a pretty wide coffee cup. One of the things to keep in mind when you're making stuff is that clay shrinks. Depending on the clay, it can shrink more than 20%. Every clay has a shrinkage rate. And so anything that you make on the wheel, you want it to be bigger than you think that it's going to be in real life, because it is going to shrink a surprising amount from when you got started. I'm going to use the sponge to compress the bottom of this a little bit. And then I'm going to take that tool that I showed you earlier, the pointy wooden one, and I am going to use that to trim away part of the clay at the bottom and make the base of this look much nicer than it looks from my hand squishing it. And then I'm going to do this trick that I love, which is to take the kind of tongue depressor side of the tool and use it to basically inject water into the little moat that you just made with the pointy end of the tool, and then cut that off. And then what that does is the water acts as a resist against the body of the cup, and it keeps all of this clay that I'm about to cut off from sticking to the clay. So you can see I cut that off and got all of this lovely slip off the side of the cup, and it didn't stick to the cup, which is amazing. But one of the things that you can do is you can use either this tool or even like another piece of like a wooden rib, which actually I don't have right now. You can dry some of the slip off outside of your piece. And there we have it. We have like kind of a shallow, gigantic coffee cup, which is fun. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the wire tool, hold it tight between two of my fingers here. You can see they're wrapped up. And I'm going to press down against the wheel, turn it slowly. You can see how that moved. So that means that I've separated it from the clay that was sticking it to the wheel. And then what I like to do is put a little bit of water onto the bat and then use the wire again to pull the water underneath the piece. And what that does is it lets me slide it, which I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Again, the water is acting as a resist between the clay and the bat, and it gives you the opportunity to kind of move it around. So you can see my hands are like super wet and clayey and a little gross. So I'm gonna dry them off on the towel. And then they make holders and things like that that you can pick pieces up without touching with your hands. But I find that if my hands are just totally dry, it's not hard to pick this stuff up. So I am going to pick it up from the bottom. You can see here, I'm holding the cup, and then I'm gonna put it, there's a board behind me, and I'm just gonna set it down on the board and then let it dry. So then what happens is you would let it dry for a while. I prepped some pieces so I can show you guys how to trim the bottom of a piece too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean the clay off here. I'm gonna keep the bat and wipe it down. And then I'll show you. So here we have a similar piece from last week. And you can see it's not wet at all. And I don't know if you guys can hear this, but it has like a different sound. It's not squishy. I can hold it, I can tap on it, which if I tapped on that other cup, it would just fold into itself. So then what I'm gonna do is turn it upside down and then find the center again. There are lots of different ways to do this. I am going to try and tap this on center. I haven't done it in a while. So hopefully it won't be a fail. But you can kind of see it's not quite on center. And then what I'm gonna do is just gently tap this until it gets where I want it. And then you can use the needle tool to kind of check the top and look and see if your center looks centered. I'm gonna say that it needs to be a little bit more to this to the right. Oop. That seems closer. I'm gonna say yes to that. And then you want to take a little bit of wet clay. So now we have the squishy clay, which you can see has a much different texture than this guy. And we're going to hold the top and then press in 3 points around the outside. So that is going to keep the piece from moving around while we trim the excess clay off the bottom. So, and that is what these tools are for. So you can see they're like metal pieces. They're a little bit sharp on the edges. And what they're going to do is cut into the clay. Let's see how this goes. Let's see if we can move this a little bit so you guys can see the side here. You can see the tool is removing material from the bottom corner, which is where it's usually thickest. And again, all of the extra pieces are going into the trough. So like, I'm not just like throwing trimmings everywhere because it's terrible to clean up afterwards. If you're making something big, sometimes you have to take this off, but I find that for me, Very helpful to leave it on for cleanup afterwards. So we're just gonna make this into whatever shape we would like it to be. In this case, I think I'm gonna put a tiny foot on it. Also think I'm a little bit off center, but we're gonna work with that because this is a demo. So right now what I'm doing is kind of leveling the bottom out a little bit so that when I put the foot in, it will be flat. It is unfortunately a little bit drier than I'd like it to be, but hopefully you guys will be able to see this. All right, so then again, I'll pick this up for a second so you guys can see the top here. There we go. And you can see that there is a little tiny foot there. And so that will make the bottom of this. Okay. Sorry. There we go. So then when you feel like you have it finished, you just remove little pieces of clay from the bottom, and brush it off. And here you have a cup with a foot. So I hope that that has been a very good learning experience for you guys. If you'd like to turn your mics on and ask questions, I would be happy to show you something else if there's something that you're interested in, or answer any questions about the studio that you might have. Hello. Last thing that I was going to show you guys is just what our glazing area looks like and what glazes are. Turn this guy around. Maybe. Well, I might not be able to turn it around, so I'll just turn my phone. All right, so it's okay. Nah, don't worry about it. I'm just going to show them the glaze test. So over here, we have the glazing table. And what I wanted to show you guys was this is the final step of any piece after it's been bisqued, which I showed you earlier. Then you would glaze it. And these are some tests so that you can see what those glazes look like, both on light clay and dark clay, and both with a textured glaze and an untextured glaze. So that is that. I'm sorry that I don't have any, like finished work to show you guys, but I could not get stuff into the kiln fast enough. Again, I'd love to open it up to questions. Do you guys have any questions about anything?
How do you know when it's not too dry to trim or too wet to trim? Because sometimes it can be just a little bit too wet to trim.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's just practice. A lot of the trimming stuff, like in this case, I didn't wrap the stuff up well enough when I left. And so it got a little bit too hard. When it's too squishy, you can tell, because before you trim, you should not be able to like easily push your fingers into it. You should definitely, like the clay should be hard enough that when you push on it, it's usually called the leather hard state. And it's called that because your clay should actually feel like leather. And so that is kind of like the best bet. So like, let's see, go back here to the phone thing. Sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm going to turn this off so I don't make you nauseous. Okay, so now you can see this guy again, right? So you can tell that it's starting to get too dry because this is like a darker colored clay and it'll start to get wet when it's dry. But also, like, see how, I mean, I don't think that you should break your clay, but in this case, clearly it's not, you know, like this is for a demo. Like you can see, like this is breaking apart. It's tearing the way that like leather might tear. So it's soft enough to push a little bit, but not like, it's not cracking. It's just like, you know, like it's tearing. And I feel like a little tiny bit wetter than this is, for me, the best state for trimming. Again, everybody kind of has like a different place that they like their trimming to be. So some people do trim a little bit wet and they find that they get better results that way. So I would be the last person to tell you that you were, you know, like doing something wrong. But if you are trying to put your trimming tools into the clay and it is a mush, then it is much too wet.
I see, thank you. And other question is, I didn't get the first time. Is the makerspace making space available for ceramics?
No, I'm afraid that at this time there isn't any space available for ceramics. I imagine that it might be something that's available in the future. But the space that I'm in right now is called Clay Space Brooklyn. And it's actually in Greenpoint, and it's a space where I rent a studio space out with a lot of other really talented people.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so this is kind of a long time. I don't want to call it a hobby because I feel like it's more than a hobby. It is a very long time love of material and ceramic studios. Were there any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Would you mind to go over the fire process? Do you fire everything at the same temperature, or?
No, actually, that's a very good question. So clay fires at different temperatures depending on what type of clay that you're using. So there's low fire clay, there's mid fire clay, and then there's high fire clay. You can see that we have an electric kiln, which I talked about earlier. So that means that for this studio, basically we focus on low fire and mid fire clays. Usually if you're doing a high fire clay, you're working with either a much larger, more powerful kiln or a gas kiln. Mostly it has to do with kiln maintenance, where the higher the temperature your kiln gets to, especially with the electric kilns, the more wear and tear it has on the kiln. And so with a public studio, you know, like a studio that is sharing its space with a lot of people, the amount of effort you have to put into repairing the kiln becomes exponential the higher that you fire to the temperatures that you fire. So things like there are porcelains that are very high fire, there are stonewares that are very high fire. There's a bunch of different types of clay. So usually they're red clay, what you think of as terracotta, is a lower fire temperature clay. And then porcelain is usually a much higher temperature clay. But we live in a world full of like amazing engineers and technicians and people who have figured out how to make really great clays at all temperatures. So now there are mid-fire porcelains that turn out beautiful. And also, you know, like higher fire red clays. Does that help to answer your question, or did you want something more specific?
No, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think, let's see, there should be, so like these would be a good example. So this is probably like a mid-fire clay or a low-fire clay, just because of the color. These guys are probably, most of the firing here is going to be mid or low fire, so it's a pretty good bet. But you can see each of these clays, even though they fire to the same temperature, they are all different colors. So there's a lot of variation.
And how can we learn about that? Like, there is any book or only by experience?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's so much information out there. Also, there are a lot of places, especially now that the world is starting to reopen, that are offering classes. ClaySpace will actually be offering classes, I don't think until the summertime. I don't know when things are going to fully reopen, but you should definitely check the website for the studio here. But there are easily like 5 or 6 at least other studios in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. And a lot of them offer beginner classes. More so, again, now that the world is starting to open up a little bit more. I know a lot of studios had kind of closed their doors temporarily to teaching classes because they didn't want to be filling the spaces with people for obvious reasons. But there's also a lot of really great information online. You can watch, I mean, I feel like I spend all of my spare time watching Instagram videos of people throwing stuff and glazing pots and talking about pottery. There's so much information available for beginners. It's like almost overwhelming. So, you know, I would definitely Google some of the pottery studios here in New York. Like I said, this is ClaySpace Brooklyn. But there's also the Greenwich Pottery House, there's Lamano Pottery, there's Brick House Pottery, there is Brooklyn Clay, there's Brooklyn Gasworks. There's a lot of options. No matter what neighborhood that you're in, you can probably find a clay studio that'll start to have beginner classes. My guess would be in the fall.
Okay, I will check that. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's amazing. I'm glad that you're excited about it. Also, if you would like to come to the Makerspace, I am physically in the Makerspace between 1 p.m. and 9 p.m. most nights, Tuesday through Friday. And I would be more than happy to talk to you about ceramics and make recommendations and send you some websites. So feel free to email me or to come by the Makerspace and ask me some questions in person. I would also be happy to have a private Zoom chat with you if that's something that you feel like would be helpful. I am very, very excited and very passionate about ceramics, and I think everyone should do it. So anything that I could do to help you get there would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Oh yeah.
I will email you for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I will look forward to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions? All right. I'm going to head back over here. Let's set this down. Yeah. So I think I'm going to turn this camera off and then turn the iPad back on just so that I can have a better view of everybody. Oh, good. Did everyone leave? No. Oh, there. Where are we? Interesting. All right. Woo. There we go. Yeah, so. Ooh. Get far away from my other. One more view. You can see the studio. Sorry about the feedback. There we go. Okay, well, cool. All right, so I think that is everything for me. If you guys do not have any more questions, or if is there like anything else, again, please come by the Makerspace, come ask me questions, really about anything. If you have Makerspace questions, if you have ceramics questions, if you have prototyping questions, we'd love to see you. We'd love to help you with your projects. And I'm really excited that you all came and watched me do my thing, because I feel like it's pretty amazing that you're excited about it too.
Thanks, Elizabeth. This was really great.
This was awesome and so interesting.
Yeah, I was like hooked.
I'm glad. I never know whether I'm covering all my bases with stuff like this. So it's good that you guys thought that it was like a solid demo.
Definitely.